see the way you live. I see the way you love. I want to live like you. Oh, I want to love the way you do. I don't wanna wait forever.
Hey boys and girls, welcome back. So, do you remember that challenge I had for you last week? It was to look up Psalms chapter 40 verse 5, and then I wanted you to read it to an adult. How did you do? Did you get a chance to look it up and read it to someone? Great. Well, I wanted to go ahead and open up my Bible to Psalms chapter 40 verse 5, and I just wanted to read it to you. It says, "Many, Lord my God, are the wonders you have done, the things you planned for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, they would be too many to declare." Do you hear what this is telling us? Boys and girls, this is telling us that there are just so many miraculous and wonderful things that the Lord does. There's too many that we could possibly say. There's just too many. Now, Psalms is from the Old Testament. So we see here in the Old Testament that God performed miracles. And we've been learning in the New Testament all about the different miracles that Jesus has performed. And God is still performing miracles every day in people's lives. That's right. He's still performing miracles every day. I want to tell you about a story that I had recently read in the newspaper. It was about this cross-country non-stop flight, and the plane was full of people. And that night they were serving fish for dinner, but the fish had gotten spoiled, and everyone who ate it became sick. Although there was one person who didn't eat dinner that night, and it was the pilot. So because he didn't eat the spoiled fish, he didn't become ill, and he was able to safely land the plane. Some people had thought that that was a miracle. And that reminds me of today's story. We're going to hear about a real miracle done by Jesus. Now, before we watch our story, I do have a question for you. Why did Jesus perform miracles? Well, Jesus had performed miracles because he wanted to glorify God and to show that he was the Son of God and that he cares for people. Now let's watch our story, and then we're going to hear from Pastor Brian with questions from kids. Let's watch.
Jesus' disciples had been hard at work. They had been healing people and teaching them. So many people came and went that the disciples did not even have time to eat. So Jesus said to them, "Come with me. Let's go to a quiet place where we can be alone and get some rest." Jesus and his disciples got into a boat to cross the Sea of Galilee, but many people saw them leaving. The people traveled by foot and they ran ahead of Jesus. When Jesus and his disciples got to the shore, the people were already there waiting for them. Jesus saw the crowd, and he cared about them because they were like sheep who needed a shepherd. So Jesus taught the people many things about God's kingdom, and he healed people who were sick. By this time, it was late in the day. Jesus' disciples came to him and said, "We are out in the middle of nowhere, and it's getting late. Tell the people to go away so they can go to the farms and villages to buy themselves something to eat." But Jesus said, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." Jesus' disciples were confused. "We can't feed this many people," they said. "It would cost a whole year's pay to buy enough bread for them to eat," Philip said. Jesus asked, "How many loaves of bread do you have? Go look." Jesus' disciple Andrew said, "A boy here has 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what good will that do for so many people?" Jesus told the disciples to instruct everyone to sit down. So all the people sat down in big groups on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven, and then he blessed the bread. He broke it into pieces and gave it to the disciples. He also divided up the fish. The disciples passed out the food to the people, and everyone ate until they were full. Then Jesus told the disciples to collect any leftover food. The disciples collected 12 baskets full of pieces of bread and fish. Jesus fed about 5,000 men that day, plus women and children. By feeding the 5,000, Jesus provided for the physical needs of the crowd. The next day, Jesus called himself the bread of life. Only Jesus is able to satisfy our souls forever by providing forgiveness, peace with God, and eternal life.
Hi there, I'm Pastor Brian, and it's time for Questions from Kids. Autumn from Tulsa, Oklahoma asks,
if Jesus meets our needs, why do some people not have enough to eat?
Autumn, that's a fantastic question, a difficult one, because we know that God has promised to meet needs, but at times we see people who, maybe are homeless or who are hungry, and we have to ask, how do these kind of align? Well, let me kind of answer this a little bit because it's a really challenging one, but let me kind of speak to a couple ideas that are baked into this question. The first thing is this: we have to differentiate between what is a want and a need. I think sometimes that's kind of a problem, that we assume that wants are actually needs and they're not. And God does not promise to give us our wants all the time, just our needs. So that's the first part. The second part is this, that we have to look at this over the long term. There may be somebody who goes without a meal and is hungry, and we can say, well, God's not meeting that person's needs, right? But then God provides for that need the next day and they have food to eat. So you have to look at the longer term as well. Another aspect is this, that God has promised to meet needs, and he chooses to use the church to meet a lot of those needs. So a lot of this should cause us to care deeply about stepping in to other people's lives and recognizing there are people who are hungry in our towns. And God has given us resources to help meet those needs. Are we being faithful? Are we giving generously? Are we serving? Are we spending time helping at a soup kitchen, for example, that is there to help meet the needs of people who don't have money right now? And so there are a lot of things going on here in terms of those practical needs. But the bigger idea here, the idea that we can be a little bit more clear on is this: the greatest need we have is not food or a place to live. The greatest need we have is Jesus. And God has completely met that need by giving us Jesus to provide salvation for us when we trust in him. That is our greatest need, and that need is available for anyone who calls on him. And so we have to remember that as well. As we seek to meet the physical needs of people, the greater thing we need to do is make sure we are stepping in to share Christ so their greater spiritual need can be met. So here's a question back for you to consider. What needs will you trust Jesus to meet?
Wow! Jesus miraculously fed a crowd with 5 loaves of bread and just 2 fish. Did you hear that, boys and girls? Just 5 of these and 2 of these. Well, maybe it wasn't a hot dog roll or a plastic squishy fish, but you get the point, right? No matter how much of the bread or the fish that the people ate, there was still more left over for the next person. The Bible tells us that at the end of the meal, the disciples collected all the leftover scraps, and it was more than what they had started with. In this way, this is just like Jesus. No matter how many people we share Jesus with, he is always going to be more than enough. His power never runs out, so there is no one whom Jesus cannot save. You see, everyone who trusts in Jesus for salvation will have eternal life. Jesus is the greatest treasure and the best provision that we can have. And because he is more than enough, sharing his love will never decrease the amount of love that he still has for us. Well, kids, that's all that I have for you this week. I hope that you tune in next week for another great story. Bye!
You love